What's up, horror fans? Anchor Pete here, and boy, do we have a very, very special show for you today. I'm here with a guest I've been super excited to talk to for a long time now. We have Mr. Joe Lansdale. Joe, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Now that I've got all the technical difficulties figured out, we're good.
Awesome, yeah. Joe has written over 50 novels. He's published more than 30 short story collections. Like I said, he writes multiple genres, including Western, science fiction, mystery, suspense, and horror. He's been writing for over 47 years, and he's won many awards over the length of his career, including the Bram Stoker Award 11 times.
Counting the lifetime achievement one, which is also a Bram Stoker.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And his stuff has been adapted into movies and TV shows, including the IFC show Hap and Leonard, and the movies Cold in July and Bubba Ho-Tep. And so somehow he's agreed to talk with me today. And I'm just ready to get going. So, Joe, I was thinking, with you writing so many different genres, do you think that the fan bases from different genres respond to your work differently?
I never really thought about it. I was just wrote what I wanted, and when I was writing horror, I think when I first moved over, well, I was before that. I actually started out in crime. I wrote crime stuff for Mike Shane Mystery Magazine and things like that. But when I got into horror, I developed a fan base. But I always felt that I wasn't going to have a fan base rule me because I didn't want to end up bored with what I was doing. So when I changed, I didn't consult anybody, or nor did I worry about it. And in time, a lot of that fan base did cross over. There's always some that are just hardcore, whatever it is, whether it's crime or horror or whatever. And not to be, sound like I'm non-caring. I love my readers, but ultimately, on something like that, I just can't worry about it. That's not my problem. My problem is to try to create the story I want to create as well as I can create it. And I've done crime, and then I moved into horror, and I did a little bit of science fictional stuff, and I did suspense and mystery and westerns, historicals, whatever I'm in the mood for. I mean, if I sign on to write a crime novel, it will have crime in it, but I can't guarantee you that it will fit the common concept of a crime novel. It may or it may not. But I
Mhm.
always felt that a reader should respect the writer to do the work they want to do. And, it's not like, I'm living at your house and I really have to pay you by writing a story that you want to read in the genre you want to read. I want to write the story I want to write. And it's
Yeah.
worked out quite well for me. So that's the closest I can say. I always have a saying, and I've said it before, and it's probably getting tiresome, but I always say I write like everybody I know is dead because I don't write for other people. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean that I don't write to be paid because I do. It doesn't mean I don't care about what I do because I do. But I can't sit down and have somebody looking over my shoulder, be it my agent, editor, readers, or whatever, because then I'm just going to, repeat myself or try to write the same tonality to it. I mean, I can fail on my own and
Mhm.
I can succeed on my own. And I probably have done, and I've done both, definitely, no probably to it. But
Right.
at least it's, I know who's responsible. And it's not because I was worried about what, the readers would think, or the agents would think, or the editors would think, or the producers, publishers. And so some of that has been difficult in some ways, but on the whole, it's given me an opportunity to do a lot of things. And, sometimes I purposely gear it towards a genre.
Mhm.
But I, I try to do what I love within the reason that I have to make a living to pay my bills. I have to be able to keep writing. I have to be able to keep creating. But I don't know many people have as much fun doing it as I do.
The story that people are probably the most familiar with that watch our channel is probably Bubba Ho-Tep because they've seen the movie
Mm,
that's based on your
yeah,
novella. And just the
yeah,
anthology itself that it comes from, The King is Dead, Tales of Elvis Postmortem, like that seems
yeah.
like something that isn't in a specific genre itself. And I
Mm,
was going to say that, you know, that story, when I watched the movie, because I haven't read the novella, but when I watched the movie, I could hear your narration coming through, Bruce Campbell's dialogue as Elvis.
yeah,
And
yeah. He
like,
can do that very well, by the way.
yeah, and like for that movie, I really thought that you captured like the despair that people might feel as they reach the end of their life, and the indignity of getting old. And I was wondering, like, when you're
Yeah.
writing a story like that that has such a high concept, are you saying to yourself, "Man, I really want to capture this kind of feeling in my story," or is that sort of like the, um, what comes naturally while you're trying to get the plot going forward?
I think sometimes it's one or the other, and sometimes it's both. The thing is I'm getting into that age area now. I'm 70 here next month, and I'm a lively 70. I still do martial arts, I still teach, I still train. But I could see it back then. My mother had an accident, and she had to go into a rest home because she couldn't be taken care of at home, and she'd had a really bad accident. And so I was there with her a lot, and my brother and I were there with her a lot. So we certainly got a taste of what those places were like, and where she was nowhere near as bad as, like, the one in Bubba Ho-Tep. It was actually a pretty good home, but there's aspects of it that can never be just right, and there's a certain loss of dignity that's impossible to avoid, I think. And then there's certain loss of dignity that is something that could be avoided, that isn't always. So I had that on my mind. And my brother is 17 years older than me. In fact, he turned 86 this month. 80, yeah, 86 this month. He's just short of being 17 years older, more like 16 and something. I want to get every day I can to make sure he knows he's older. But he was in Memphis when he was a young man, about 17 or so, and he tried to record at Sun Records. Well, he met his wife, still his wife, some good grief, that's been a long time ago. That was in the 50s. And she graduated high school with Elvis. So she knew Elvis and introduced him to Elvis. I mean, it wasn't like a great friendship or anything, but it was like, in passing, here's this guy who works at Lowe's Theater and shows people to their seats with a flashlight. And he still had brown hair or blonde hair then, and
Uh-huh.
brownish hair. And so that's how he met him. And but he was, of course, aware that there was this guy going into Sun Records that was beginning to make a hit. And this was before that, but that came later. And he met
Mhm.
Johnny Cash, and he met a lot of those people, mostly in passing, but nonetheless, they were all trying to get into the music business. My brother ended up going into the military, and but I that Elvis thing connected with the rest home thing, and the fact that I was young when John Kennedy was killed, and it had
Yeah.
such an impact on me, and especially at that time. That kind of thing just didn't happen in the States back then. It's amazing to look back now and see how naive life was. It was both wonderful and awful at the same time, because it wasn't the most wonderful social place for black people, gay people, women. If you
Right.
were white, and especially if you were white and rich, you were grooving. But all of those things kind of came together, and so I wrote this story, and I remember writing it and thinking, man, this is one nutty story. I've been reading a lot of the beat writers and beat poets, and an aspect of that comes into the prose, the way it's written. If you When you get around to reading it, I think you'll see that aspect. And in fact, I felt like I was really improvising, I guess, like jazz does. And strangely, I'm not a big jazz fan, but I
Yeah.
love that riffing, and I love riffing off that idea. And so when I got through with it, I sent it, and I thought, just a day or two, I said, "Oh my God, that is the worst piece of crap I have ever written." I don't know. I need to write those guys, and write Paul Salmon, who was doing the editing the book, and
Mhm.
withdraw that story. I just don't think that's I don't know what the hell I was thinking, because even me, I was going, "Wow, that's crazy." It's got hieroglyphics in it. It's got all kinds of stuff in it, and
Right.
before I could write him, because I was thinking about it, I was getting ready to do it. I got a letter back of acceptance, and he was crazy about the story. And I say with some modesty, I think it's the one that's remembered from that anthology more than any other. And then later, Don Coscarelli called me out of the blue and said, "This is Don Coscarelli. I'm a direct." I said, "Don, I know who you are, man. I've seen Phantasm, and I
Yeah.
like your stuff." And he asked if he could come visit a few days, and I just said, "Yeah, come out." And he rented a car when he got to the airport, came to the house, stayed with me a few days, and my family, and we love Don, and
Yeah.
he brought the kids things, presents and stuff, which was sweet of him. And we
Yeah.
talked about other things. We weren't talking about Bubba Hotep at all, We talked about the drive-in, I think Dead in the West, and I don't remember, but none of those things materialized. But the bottom line was he later called and he wanted to option Bubba Ho-Tep. And I
Uh-huh.
said, Don, you can't film Bubba Ho-Tep. It just can't be done, man. He said, well, no, I think I can do it. And I said, well, I don't want to take your money, and but I'm not going to give you a free option either. We're paying bills here, man. We're paying bills. But anyway, he did end up optioning it, not for a lot of money. I mean, he got the brother-in-law rate. And at that time, I wasn't doing a whole lot of film options. I'd done some, but
Yeah.
he optioned it, and he also at the same time he optioned Incident on and off a mountain road.
Yeah.
And later on, and later on that was filmed as well. But it hung around, and the next time he came to option it, I just said, "Okay, man, it's your money. I'm going to take it because I warned you. I'm through warning you. I told you." And
Right.
so then at some point he wrote a script and he sent it to me. And no, he asked me if I wanted to write a script, but it was not enough money for me to take the time to write a script, to be honest. And um, so then he wrote a script and he sent it to me, and I thought, you know what, this is pretty damn good. There's some stuff in here that I think needs changing, and I made a few suggestions, and I don't know if he paid any attention to them right then, but later I know Bruce Campbell made almost the same suggestions, and he did make those changes. But and also just another little bit of trivia is that my son is a great Bruce Campbell fan, and he had
Right.
seen The Evil Dead, and all that stuff. And he said, "Man, Daddy, if you ever get a movie made, can you get Bruce Campbell in it?" And I said,
Yeah.
"Well, son, I don't really get to pick those things." And I
Right.
said, I certainly love Bruce Campbell, but I don't know how that would come about. And Don had some ideas for who might be good at it, but there was nobody he was excited about, and no one I was excited about. And then he
Mhm.
called. And he said, "What would you think about Bruce Campbell?" And I said, "Man, that's who I want." And that made me my son's hero for a while.
Yeah.
I still haven't admitted totally to him that I had nothing to do with it.
With Bubba Hotep, there's a joke about there being a sequel at the very end of the movie and the end of the credits,
Yeah,
and then I know that like there was talk about that, but then you guys ended up
right.
making a sequel in the comics, right?
Well, a prequel, and in the
Oh,
comics,
right, right,
there was times when Bruce and Don wanted to do a sequel to Bubba, and I didn't like the idea. I just felt like, we've already done the redemption thing. Everything else will be downhill from here because I
right.
don't see it. Well, then later on, I kind of got in the mood to do it because they both wanted to do it, and I was going to write a script, but I couldn't write it for what Don could pay, and I understood his position, but I also understood my own. And
Mm.
so I hung out for a long time on that, and I didn't do it. And then Bruce got to thinking about it, and he thought, you know what? I had somebody else do a script. Bruce didn't like that script, which I'm not talking out of school. That's common knowledge, and it wasn't the script that he wanted to do. And so I think he got to thinking, you know what? I don't think there ought to be a sequel either. So that's why there's no sequel. And I think that there's a potential for somebody else to play that part. And
Right,
uh, and I think Don has talked about that, and that it could happen. Um, I don't know that it will, but I don't know that it won't. But
right.
I'm not really sure there needs to be a sequel. I mean, why do you need a sequel to that? It stands on its own. It's about something other than just Elvis fighting a goddamn mummy. I mean that the mummy is a representation of death and specter and age and all of those things. Which when I was a younger man, when I wrote that, I felt like I was in touch with that. I always felt like I was in touch with my mortality since I was young, certainly in my mid 20s. I think I got a hold on that. And so I've always sort of been aware of it. And I saw some of the people I most admired were older people. And I felt like, why are people ignoring these time machines? Why are they ignoring these people who have knowledge? I mean, some of them didn't. Some of them were absolute assholes, just like anybody else. I mean, it's like the greatest generation aren't all great. A lot of them came back and became members of the Ku Klux Klan. So I hate
Right.
those kind of like overall sweeping, you know, concepts. But You know, my dad was my hero. He died. He was just a year older than me when he died, and
Oh
he
wow.
had some real faults. He had some real faults. He was very racist, but he didn't treat people badly. He even treated people that black who were black very well, but he didn't speak of them well. And
Mhm.
so I learned a lot about that idea that, you know, I hate this. I'm on this side or I'm on this side, because life is so much more complicated than that. And so
Right.
that was part of it too. And all of that went into that one film, you know, this
Mm.
lack of appreciation for things. And, you know, that's how it happened.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I actually just watched it recently and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Um, I
Yeah.
know that like you wrote another novella that was like that prequel to it. That was
A
like
novel,
Bubba.
actually, short novel.
Yeah, and then that was adapted into a comic, and then there was like a Evil Dead crossover with
Crossover.
Ash. Yeah, yeah. And so I know that like I remember when I was growing up, you know, you had the Jonah Hex comic that you wrote, and that's
Yep.
kind of like legendary in itself. That Jonah Hex
Yeah.
comic, I remember that from when I was a kid. And
Yeah.
you
Well,
know,
I
you've
didn't I
written.
didn't write the Bubba comics. I should say that I didn't write the Bubba comics. They were just based on my work. Right.
Right, right.
And in fact, they didn't
But
even
with
put
that,
my name on them when they early ones. They didn't put my name on them. So I
oh,
thought,
okay.
really, guys, really?
Yeah. Well, but then I've also read recently. I've read your Conan story too, or one of your Conan stories,
Right?
the comic that was by Dark Horse before he got purchased by
Songs of
Marvel.
the Dead. Yeah. Hmm.
Right, right, right. I just read that, and so I was wondering, is there any other character of yours that you think would be great to cross over with an established character in some other literature?
Well, you know, I don't know about that, but I've done Tim Truman, who did Jonah Hex with me and did Conan. We also did the Lone Ranger.
Oh,
And
okay.
we had a Lone Ranger. Yeah, we did 4 issues or 4 or 5. I can't remember now. I think 4 for Topps Comics. And then I actually wrote a second one with a different artist because Tim was not available. And that one never got done because Topps went out of the comic business. And it's out there
Right.
somewhere. There's a script and there's beautiful art with it in black and white. I wish somebody would go out there and go, hey, let's do that. Let's pick that up
Yeah.
and do it because it's good. It's a gung fu, a western. It takes place
Uh-huh.
in Chinatown in San Francisco, if I remember correctly. And I think I wrote the whole thing. I did. I wrote the whole thing, and it was illustrated. And I think the whole thing was illustrated. It was never colored or pen. You know, they didn't put in the dialogue and stuff like that yet. But that's out there. Plus, you know, in literature, I did Batman. I did Batman. The Captured by the Engines and a young adult novel called Terror on the High Skies. And I wrote for Batman the Animated Series, and I
Yeah.
wrote for Superman the Animated Series. I wrote some excuse me, a Batman movie called Son of Batman animated.
Right.
I wrote an independent Jonah Hex short.
Okay.
Um, I just recently wrote an adaptation of Howard Waldrop's very fine story, um, you know, Night of the Cooters, which is about War of the Worlds in the Old West, and it was a George Martin financed it. Vincent D'Onofrio directed it and starred in it, but it's also animated as well as live action. They're blended together by this group out in Santa Fe, and
Uh-huh.
you know, it's really cool looking. I've seen some of what they're going to do with it, and I'm pretty excited about that. So you know, I've done a lot of mixtures of animation westerns as well as characters. I did a Tarzan novel that was that Edgar Rice Burroughs left unfinished. I did that. Um, you know, so I've done a few of those things, but I'm much more interested in my own work. But you know, I never say never. Who knows? Something might come along, and you know, my friend Neil Barrett and I wrote a Supergirl comic. You know, an episode in a series of Supergirl comics. We did a satire of Supergirl, and you know, so I've done a lot, and I've done a lot of individual comics that really aren't about any particular, you know, well known character. But I'm
Right.
open to it, but I'm not driven to it.
Right. Well, that your lineup of episodes for Batman the Animated Series are just like classic episodes that I remember from when I was a kid. And that's my first exposure to your work is watching that show. You know, because I was
Thank
like in the age of my daughter, who she's 11 right now, and I was like 11 when the animated series came around. And
Oh,
last
you
night,
young man, you young
yeah,
man,
yeah,
you young.
yeah. my daughter and I, we watched Perchance to Dream last night just because I knew I was going to be talking to you today.
Right.
And I was wondering, when you're writing a script like that, that's an episode that focuses very much on Bruce Wayne, right? And you're
Right.
writing a show that's essentially going to be watched by kids, of course, adults too. But like,
Right.
is that a challenge to write something that doesn't really feature Batman that much in it for a kids cartoon?
Well, Michael Reeves and other people had this idea that they had put together. It was an idea. And so they would pick writers they thought could handle those ideas and bring something interesting or new or different to it. So they gave it to me and they said, look, here's a few things we want in it. And this is, kind of what we're after. Can you make this work? And I thought, yeah, I can make this work. Batman, in many ways, is a hard boiled or noirish character. And that's right down my alley. And so I had great fun writing that one. And it was easy for me to separate the two, really. I didn't have any trouble with that at all. My son feels like the best one I did was Read My Lips.
Right.
And I did enjoy that one, which is very much a gangster one. And then I did a Jonah Hex one, called Showdown. And there, on some days, that's my favorite, but most days, I guess I kind of agree with my son. But Perchance to Dream is a much more psychologically complex one in some ways. But when you really look at Read My Lips, for that short of time you have an animation, it's fairly psychologically complex as well. And then I wrote
Yeah.
one of the most reviled, which is called Critters, and it was written for Batman and Robin adventures. It wasn't actually a Batman animated, but everybody thinks it is because it's boxed that way. But we all
Right.
had a great time doing it, and it's starting to gain its own following because everybody thought, "What the hell is this?" With Farmer Brown, and it's so over the top. But we were
Yeah.
kind of, Gerber. So is Gerber's name first name Stephen Gerber? I can't
Yeah.
remember. The
Yes.
guy that invented Howard the Duck. He came
Right.
up with
Right.
this idea. Yeah, and for some reason they go, okay, we like this idea, but we want Lansdale. He's going to do it. And then it got a bunch of other nuts on it, and we all just did this nutty piece, which we had a great time. And when I watch it, I laugh. I just think it's a hoot. But it
Yeah.
doesn't fit in with the Batman the animated series very well because it really wasn't part of Batman the animated series.
Right.
There's a new series coming out. I wish they'd come get me, let me write something. I'm ready. I'd love to do it. But yeah, it was great fun, and a lot of readers have come to me through having encountered those episodes.
Yeah, yeah, and in that particular episode too, because we didn't get around to watching Showdown yet or Critters, but Bruce jumps off that bell tower in the
Yes,
cemetery, and that's kind
yeah.
of risky to put in a kids show, right? The
Well,
guy's jumping
Michael
off.
Reeves saved us on that one. I mean, I'm sure there were other people involved, but Michael, when we did it, we turned it in and we loved it because it was much more graphic than that. He just plain jumped and you could see him falling. And they finally decided that the way to keep the idea in, but to supposedly make it less frightening for children, was to use the vertigo approach, like the film Hitchcock did with all of the, was it Dali, I believe, had the artwork. And
Right.
Michael and I both thought, damn, that makes it worse. It's scarier with all this weird psychological stuff going on. But
Yeah.
the kids got it. They understood what was going on there, and it wasn't like he died. He woke up, and but that was an interesting thing. And Michael Reeves, I owe him so much with these series because he let me do what I wanted. And sometimes he would say, "Hey Joe, you got a lot here. By the way, they may be blobs of paint, but they're expensive." So,
Right.
but he was also a martial artist. So in some of them, I wrote the martial arts as carefully as I could into the script without overdoing it. And he was able to maintain that, keep it in there. And the animators fortunately followed that within reason. It's what I call theatrical martial arts.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I didn't want it to be too far away from what real martial arts are like. But obviously I wanted it to be like theatrical martial arts. Like Bruce Lee always said that he would no more kick anybody in the head than he would punch him in the foot. That was for theater. He kicked low.
Right.
He believed in low kicks, things of that nature. So, anyway, I really, it's one of the high points in my career. I didn't know it at the time, and I knew I was having fun. And I think what happened there is, and I know what happened there is, my really good friend Bob Wayne, who I've known for many, many years, worked for DC. And I was
Mhm.
visiting him once, and he said, "Let me show you something." And he showed me that opening for Batman. That's all they had at that time. he said, "Would you like to do something like that?" I said, "I'd love to write for something like that." Then I forgot about it. And then quite a bit time passed by and I got a phone call. I think it was Michael. It may have been Paul Dini. May have been Bruce, Tim. I don't remember who called me. I think it was Michael. And he called me and says, "Hey, man, would you like to try a script?" And I went, "Yeah." So I'm sure that my buddy Bob Wayne put a word in for me, you know. And if it, and since he did, I really appreciate that. I got to do something really unique, and I've had such a unique career. That comes from not being forced into doing stuff because this is supposed to be what you do next year, and you got to have another one like it. I just don't want to do that. I've already worked in factories, and I didn't really like it, and I don't want to
Yeah.
work in writing factories. And I've done some ghost work and some pseudonymous work to pay the bills to buy a car, and I didn't like it. And now that
Mm,
and it's been many years since I've had to do it. Really,
yeah.
by the middle '80s, I never had to do that again unless it was something I really wanted to do.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Well, you say it's a highlight of, or one of the highlights of your career. I agree. Like
Yeah, it
that
is.
show.
It's not, I wouldn't say it's the only highlight, and I wouldn't say it's the highlight, but I would put it in the top five. You know,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
most important stuff is my own fiction, and and we're talking career, not family and things like that. We're just talking career because you're supposed to say the kids and the wife,
Right. Right.
and if I don't, yeah, and the pit bull. We have a pit bull right now. He counts. But
Oh, okay.
those really are the most important things. I mean, when you get to the end of it and all you've got's a stack of books, that ain't much. But if you've got the other and the stack of books, it's a lot. It begins to multiply itself.
Right. Well. Speaking of stacks of books, I have a couple of yours right here. I have Savage
Yeah.
Season, which I just finished. I'm going to do a review on my other channel, the Anchor Pete channel.
All right.
My wife actually just bought this for me for my birthday. It's coming up. It's actually signed
Yep.
by you, one of your short story
Okay.
collections. But I was going to say for Savage Season, you're talking about like great aspects of your career. I know that Hap and Leonard is such a big part of your
That's another one.
career, and right now there's the big Hap and Leonard read along that Mother
Yes.
Horror is in charge of. And so I was going to
Sadie,
ask you
she's
this.
great.
The thing about that though is it's interesting because I feel like she writes horror reviews, but yet she chose to do Hap and Leonard for the read along. And it's like, do you think that a story can have just like horrific moments in it, and that constitutes it as horror?
I don't really care. It's just
Okay,
not my concern. The thing that I have found interesting though is a lot of people that some of my books that aren't hard at all have been up for Bram Stoker's, and I go what? And
yeah,
some of
yeah,
my short stories that aren't hard at all have won them. The Big Blow won a Bram Stoker. The events concerning a nude foldout found in a Harlequin romance won one, and I don't know exactly why. So I do think that probably my love of all those genres causes the elements to bleed into it.
sure,
Savage Season is the first in the Hap and Leonard series, and I honestly say this with some modesty. I think they get better as they go because you start to know the characters more. You start to introduce new characters. You start to have depth and flaws and strengths in the characters and changes in the characters. They don't age as fast as I do. I always figure if I'm not writing about them, they're not aging. They only age when I write about them, and then still more slowly. You know, I've
right,
had people say, "Well, that'd be this old." I said, "Well, how old is James Bond?" You know,
right, right,
yeah, how old are a lot of these characters? Travis McGee, etc. All those that were written during their heyday. But yeah, I think that you can see horror elements in the work, and I
yeah,
think it's atmosphere. I think the atmosphere sometimes feels that way, and
yeah,
I think it also proves that no matter what you think you like, that if you're open-minded, you might find that you like other stuff. And
right,
sometimes you introduce people into this because they know I have written horror and have read my horror, so they try it. And I
right,
think too that there is a heavy bit of atmosphere, and I don't mind being violent when I think it's should be. I
yeah,
think violence isn't there. It's one of the reasons I hate the splatterpunk label and don't want anything to do with the label. It doesn't mean
mm,
I haven't written some things that fit that, but that's not my
sure,
career. I don't want to. I'm a writer. I'm not this writer or that writer, and it doesn't
right,
break my heart when people call me a horror writer or whatever. But it does kind of annoy me to be called a splatterpunk. But I use elements from all of that. And when I think
sure,
violence in there, it's not because I want it to be something that you love or appreciate. It's just the opposite. And I'm
Yeah.
always surprised when people don't get that, or when you have racist characters. That doesn't show, I'm not trying to write a racist novel. I'm trying to do
Right.
just the opposite. Unless you're an idiot, you can tell that, it's not the words, and it's not what happens so much as it's the context.
Mhm.
And we've lost that. We've done this whole thing that, if you say a word that offends me, I can't read it, or I have to have trigger warnings. I don't care if you want trigger warnings, you do it, but I'm not putting any in because I don't know what would trigger somebody. I mean, like the events concerning a nude foldout found in a Harlequin romance, are about a guy that's triggered by the fact that his life is not like a Harlequin romance. And that's absolutely silly, but it's meant to be. It's meant to be a parody of the idea that violence makes us, violent. Well, certain people are going to be drawn to that because there's something inside of them that's already wrong. But if that were
Right.
true, think about all the millions who read the books and see the movies that are violent that didn't do anything. If you're going to be use statistics, then what you would say is that, hey, this causes people not to commit violence, which is just as
Right.
silly. But the point is that's a ridiculous idea. The people who respond to that already have something wrong with them that they're looking for.
Right.
They may find methodology that could be, but the rest of us aren't looking for that method. We're not thinking,
Mhm.
let's go out and kill somebody.
Right.
That's not our thoughts. And to me, with the events concerning a nude foldout, what could be worse than being disappointed with your life, having to deal with real things and not having romance in that sort of manner, which
Right.
is never realistic to begin with, in the same way that most violence is not very realistic either in film or books,
Yeah.
only up to a point. Yeah.
But what's interesting though is that, like, for the first book of yours that I read, because Savage Season is not your first book that I read. I read Cold in July, but Cold in
Yep.
July and Savage Season both have scenes that are really jarringly, like, upsetting. Like,
Yep.
you feel like you're going on a certain
Yes.
path, and then all of a sudden the scene happens. It just blows your
Yes.
mind. And what I was thinking about that was, um, in the adaptation of Cold in July, for instance, that scene is
Hmm.
different. And I was wondering, was
Hmm.
that changed to make it more sensational? Because you're talking
Okay,
about,
which scene are we talking about? Because there were others changed. Which one are we talking? Don't
right,
don't give it
right, but
away.
yeah, yeah, we could do a little spoiler for Cold in July, but essentially, in the scene where they look at the tape and it says Star Wars in the book, and the
Oh
girl is
yeah,
shot in the head, whereas in the
right,
movie it's called baseball batting practice, right?
right, right.
So I just was
Well,
wondering,
I
like,
think
why
I
that
think
was changed. Sorry.
why the change. Well, Nick D'Amici, who wrote the script, is a friend of mine, so you'd have to ask him. But I actually thought that was pretty clever. I thought that was smarter than what I did in that particular thing. The reason I like Star Wars is because it was just a common popular movie, and so people would go, "Oh, it's Star Wars." And a
Yeah,
batting practice, I think in reality, might people go, "What is that?" and be more inclined because these cheap tapes were everywhere. I mean, people wanted to see Star Wars for sure, but most everybody had already seen it 20 times. But
right.
I get what he did, and I think cinematically it was a really good choice.
Yeah, I mean, it
And
was it was
and the
definitely.
book actually was, I think, a darker vision once you got into it. I think it was more upsetting, and I think the way they did it was appropriate for that because I think there is a difference between it's like nudity in films. I'm a male. I don't mind seeing a female body without clothes, but that female body is different than reading about it in a book because you just made that up. That doesn't exist. But that actress has to carry that with her for the rest of her life. And some of them, if you don't care, you don't care. But a
Right.
lot of times when people are put in a position where they feel obligated to do it because of film. If you think of, like, my friend George's Game of Thrones, he might disagree with me, but the scenes where the young lady is raped and is pretty graphic. Um, and in a book, I think that works in a different way. It's worse in some ways, but in another way, you're not asking somebody to portray that person
Mhm.
and will be on camera for forever. It can be worse in the book, but that character doesn't exist. If you shoot a dog in the head in the book, it doesn't die. It doesn't in the movie either. So,
Right, right.
but when you're asking somebody to portray themselves nude, and some people are fine with that, it doesn't affect them at all. And I fine. Like I say, I like nudity myself. I mean, I'm a male, and so I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to give you some, but I would not ever, if I were making a film myself, ask a woman to to be nude in a film, because it's beyond whether it's right for the film, because it's rare when it's truly needed in the film. I think there are some
Yeah,
exceptions, and where you say, okay, this is what the film needs. Are you okay with this, or don't come on board?
right.
But most of the time, I think it's not needed. You know,
Mhm.
Yeah, and that woman, I've seen interviews too with actresses that I saw when they were young, and then now that they're older, they go, "Oh my God, I got kids, and I got nieces and nephews, and so I just think that that's asking a different thing."
It's-
Same with
Well,
violence. I mean, if we were talking about that, I think violence in movies, you make a choice. I like a movie that uses violence in a way that is either cartoonish, or on the
mhm,
opposite side is truly upsetting in a way that makes you think violence is not cool, you know.
right, right. Well, as far as cartoonish violence goes, that kind of brings us up to the
Yep.
first thing that I saw of yours as an adult. See, because one of the things that was so great was I kind of got into your stuff during the quarantine. My friend,
Okay.
he worked as the script supervisor on your movie Christmas with the Dead, and so he saw I was
Okay.
making
Yeah.
music
Yeah.
videos. Yeah, and he was
Yeah.
like, "Hey, you should watch this movie." And I watched that movie, and I absolutely loved it. And I know that
Yeah.
like your daughter is in it, and your son wrote
You
it. And I was just
Yep.
wondering, is there
And my
anything like
friend
that?
Terrell Lee Langford directed it. He's a friend of mine, and I've known Lee a while. We're good buddies. Yeah.
Oh, all
He's
right,
like a
yeah, yeah,
brother.
yeah. Well, Nate said that he really enjoyed being on the team and helping to make the movie. And
Yeah.
I just loved it. I love the characters. I love the idea of like taking this idea of loss and merging it with like the drudgery of like
Right.
preparing for Christmas and then like the zombie
Right.
apocalypse. And I was wondering, is
Right.
there anything like that down the road? Like, are you working on making any more adaptations of your stories with your family?
Yeah. And I don't know if it's going to happen, but I wrote a long story. It's not quite a novella, and it maybe not quite a novelette either, but it's a longer story called The Projectionist, which Lawrence Block, one of my favorite writers, bought in for an anthology, along with a lot of other writers. But I usually, when I write something, I don't try to think, can this be a movie? I just that seems like a distracting way of thinking. I don't ever see actors in the parts, any of that stuff, and
Sure.
when I finished, but when I was writing this one, I really felt, I said, it's about cinema, but it's very cinematic. And
Right.
I got interested in trying to direct it. I wanted to direct it. And I talked to my son, who had written Christmas with the Dead. And I said, this may be a chance for you to write a script where we have more money. Because, Christmas with the Dead was made for about $50,000. I mean, it was
Right.
made on the cheap, and some of the actors in there were really good. Some of them, were doing their best, and I appreciate their efforts. And my
Yeah.
daughter always goes, "Oh my God, I was terrible. It was my first film," and she's done plenty of stuff since then in commercials and things like that. But I
Right.
felt like that I learned a lot on that set. I learned a tremendous amount. I've been on many, many sets. I mean, Don's my buddy, and John Irvin and I used to talk about directing when he was supposed to originally direct A Cold in July before Jim Mickle did it, and
Oh,
John
okay.
Irvin was going to do it, not the writer, but the direct. He did Ghost Story and number of other Hamburger Hill, and he's got a long list of. But
Sure.
I decided I wanted to direct this, so Keith wrote a script based on my story, which is terrific. Um, and my daughter is going to play a small part in it, but mainly she's going to provide some music for it because she's a professional musician and singer. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, we got that going, and we've got some excitement about it, but we won't have it till we have it, and it's going to be a lot more expensive than Christmas with the Dead, which was made with the help of the Stephen F. Austin University. That they helped us a
Right.
lot. Um, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say, because like to me, that was my first exposure to your stuff as an adult.
Well, I'm glad you
And
like that because it's really pretty. It's like our Roger Corman film.
right, right.
It's our. We're going to get this made no matter who dies.
Right, right. Yeah, because you watch the trailer for it and it looks like a direct to video kind of zombie
Yep.
movie. but it just got
Yeah.
so much heart, and you really care for the main
That is
character. And you
what
start
makes it. And
yeah.
there's some possibility that it may be remade in a more
Mhm.
expensive um, platform with my son directing it. And
Right.
you know, I think it had more money. There's other things we could do, but you couldn't have
Yeah.
had more heart. You know, Keith's script has so much heart, and
Yeah.
he, that's Keith. That's him. That's my son. Because my short story is only, like Keith will tell you, it would have made about 15 minutes of film or 20 because it's very short and it doesn't
Right.
have all the characters that he invented in there. And I did the only thing I can take credit for is I did the sermon that Chet Williamson, who's also a very fine writer as well as an actor in the film.
Right.
I worked on that sermon because I'd grown up in the church and I'm an atheist, but my son, didn't have any real background in that. So I worked on his sermon. So that's my claim to fame in that movie. And that's it, is like a few
Yeah.
minutes in the sermon. But
Yeah.
Keith did a marvelous job. And he had a movie that he co-wrote recently that was filmed called The Pale Door.
Right. Right.
It's a weird.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I haven't seen that one, but I know it was on Shutter, and
Yeah.
Aaron B. Kuntz, right? He directed it.
Yeah, yeah, good guy. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I gotta check that out because I thought your son did a great job with Christmas of the Dead. So we gotta.
I did
I
too.
think we might
I thought
eventually.
he did.
Yeah, Danny and I might eventually interview Aaron B. Kuntz. Do you think that your son would want to get interviewed too?
I'm sure he would. He started doing interviews. He's starting to get pulled in a lot, and he's good at it, and he enjoys it. And my daughter does interviews, and of course, she's been in a lot of stuff and done tremendous amount of stuff in the music area and things. But
Yeah,
yeah, I'm sure he would. Anytime you want to do that, let me know, and I'll connect you to, and you
appreciate
can you can talk about it. And I'm sure Aaron would do it too. He's a good
it. Yeah.
guy, and I hope he will.
Yeah, yeah. I think that your daughter ran this because there's a whole Facebook page of just your collectibles, and I think that that's how my wife got this book was like there's a whole
Oh,
Facebook
okay.
page of
Yes,
people
yes.
that talk about your collectibles, like your signed books and stuff. And I think that your
Yeah,
daughter
well, she
ran.
doesn't run that page, but she is on that page, the
Oh, okay,
Joe Lansdale collectors page. Yeah, she
right.
doesn't run it, but she's on there a lot because she has access to a lot of it, and she gets copies of my books and at a discount, and then later on when they start to age a little bit, she can sell them, and she gives people fair prices, and
Yeah,
it's a family business. We're all in this together, and my wife really handled all of our business for years and years and years. She sort of finally kind of semi-retired from doing that, but because we've all kind of got to where now I've got accountants, I've got different agents, and the business, eats you alive if you eventually don't get some kind of. In fact, I'm thinking about taking on some different help in a different way right now. So it's like that, but thank goodness for her and Karen. I don't. A lot of people don't know it, but she created the Horror Writers Association, and it was a idea that Rick McCammon had, Robert McCammon, but we all call him Rick.
yeah.
But he didn't want to do it, so he just this
Uh-huh.
idea, but I don't want to do it. And Karen said, "I'll do it," and she worked on putting all the lists together. And back then there was no email and all that stuff, and she did it all by hand, and she did Xerox copies and stapled the pages together, and they had little covers, and she sent it out, and it caught on. There was all these people doing it, but we volunteered to write articles and stuff like that. But finally, Dean Koontz, who I knew. And still know, but I knew well then. Said, you know what? I will put some money in this and make it, a better looking magazine and stuff. And we were all like, thank goodness. And he did. But my wife got the Richard Lehman Award for her, creation of. She is the founder of the Horror Writers Association.
Wow.
It's Rick McCammon's idea, and Dean was able to make it far more professional. But she's the one, and people need not to forget that. And people easily want to just take oh, it must have been Dean Koontz or McCammon or me. I get credit for it too. I didn't
Right.
do that. I was a slave to whatever my wife wanted me to do. That's what I did. I helped
Yeah.
her do those things, but she's the one that's responsible for that. And at the time, when Rick came up with the idea, he wanted to call it HOW, the Horror Occult Writers League. That's what it was.
Okay.
And then it got changed to the by a consensus to the Horror Writers of America, and then as it's widened, then it became the Horror Writers Association.
Right.
So and it's
That's
changed. It's changed a lot since then, but she was the one.
man, no kidding about it being a family business.
It is a
I'm
family
gonna
business.
put the link to that in the description too, the Horror Association, and then also for your Collectibles Facebook page too, and to your website as
Thank you.
well. Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, thank you for being on here. Like,
I was
when we
glad to
reach
do it.
the end of, oh, thank you. Yeah, when we reach the end of the video, we usually just had the person we're interviewing just sort of talk about what's coming up. If you have anything that you want to plug or talk about.
Okay. Okay. Well, right now I have a novel out, Moon Lake, which I'm pretty excited about. It seems to be doing really, really well. And I have last year, I had one out called More Better Deals. It's still available. It'll be going to paper before too long. Um, I have it'll be a while before it comes out, but Night of the Cooters, the Howard Waldrop story I adapted, will be a short film, and with Vincent D'Onofrio starring in it and directing it. And he did a
Yeah,
great job. I was out there while they were doing it, and George was kind enough to, put us up at his guest house, George Martin, while we were there, because he's producing it. He's been friends with Howard forever. And I've known George and Howard for a long time myself, And so it was fun to know there was kind of a community deal, because we all kind of started out together. George and Howard are a little older than me. And so I think they had a few years jump on me, but we all used to, go to a place called AggieCon in College Station and talk and visit. And back then, all of us were struggling and trying to. I remember George and I were laughing about, talking about, this wasn't necessarily a conversation we had, but the kind of conversations we had would say, "Oh my God, amazing! They're paying like $100 an hour or something. Maybe we can, you can sell something there." And and
right.
and they tended to go more in the science fiction fantasy direction, and I tended to go more in the horror crime direction. Although we all crossed. I mean, George wrote horror, and so but it's really good to see a lot of us who started out together. We're still here, and it
Yeah,
sometimes saddens me. Some of us some of the writers that we started out with aren't still here, and I don't mean that just dying. I mean their careers didn't take off, and some of them were far more talented than I am, and it didn't happen for them. And I couldn't tell you why.
yeah,
I'm not a big believer in luck, but there's no doubt that accidental events sometimes help. Personality helps, and the material, of course, really helps. But there are a lot of other factors, and you see it in all the arts. You see this one person that takes off, and you're thinking, why did that happen? That person couldn't write themselves out of a paper bag with a hot pencil. And then you'll see somebody else that's just amazing, and you go, oh my God, what happened to them?
right.
So, and I'm not saying the right people don't get it. They do, but a lot of right people also, do not get it. Some get it, some don't. And it's interesting to look back, and it's happy to see some of the writers who did, manage to make it, or manage to, stay in the business, so to speak. And for me, it's just been great. But,
Yeah.
I know that just for the slightest, turn of the dial, it could have gone in the opposite direction. I'd still be a janitor.
Well, I have to say that for me, like I just feel honored to get to talk to you because
Well,
like I
thank
said,
you.
I got into your work during COVID, and to me it was like a light bulb going off where I was like, oh my God, I didn't know this man's works. And then I've just I read Cold in July and Savage Season, and when I'm getting into Hap and Leonard, and it just is like there's this whole library of your work that I'm just like, give me more, you
Yeah.
know. And so
Yeah.
I just felt so lucky to be able to talk to you today.
I
Yeah.
appreciate him. Tell Danny hi for me. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But we just were so happy to have you on our show, and if you ever want to come back again, too, we would gladly have you back on and
sure.
talk about something down the road.
Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk again.
All right, Joe, you got it. Thank you, sir.